Hello and welcome to Expats Everywhere. If you could tell us your name, where you're from, and a little about yourself.
My name is Jean. I lived most of my life in the US, in the Los Angeles area, where I worked at a few MNCs and a startup. And in late 2016, I decided to resign from my previous job and move to Singapore for my husband, who is Singaporean. Since then, I did a bit of traveling throughout Asia. I started my own YouTube channel and I'm starting a new job next week here in Singapore, so I'm really excited.
That's brilliant. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Can you tell us, where are your parents from?
My parents are from China,
Okay.
but they immigrated to the US more than 20 years ago.
Okay, so you grew up the whole time in the United States?
I was actually born in Beijing. I lived there until about second grade, and then I moved to the US. Then I lived in Southern California.
So what countries have you worked in?
I've only worked in the US in finance and accounting, but next week I start working in Singapore, so I'm really excited. I'll be working for a startup in marketing.
So what's it like living in Singapore?
So I've been living in Singapore for more than a year and I really like it here. I like the convenience of transportation, being able to take the MRT or the bus. I like the people here, the culture here.
Are there any things that bother you about Singapore?
I think the only thing that took me some time to adjust, it didn't really bother me. So English is a primary language in Singapore. But they do use British English here, and since I'm in the US, I'm from the US, I'm used to using American English. So I needed some time to adjust to some of the British English words. Like for example, standing in line is what we would say in the US. Here in Singapore, they call it a queue or queuing. So there's some words that took me some time to adjust. In the beginning, initially, when I first moved here, the lack of personal space that you get. When I went to a grocery store, for example, and I was standing in line, I felt like the people behind me were standing a bit too close. And it happened more than once. But I think over time, I've just learned to adapt to the culture, just embrace it. Where if I really need to, I just take a few steps back or a few steps forward, but I'm okay with it now.
Yeah. So speaking of the difference in languages, Jean here actually has some videos on YouTube about the difference between some of the words that are used in Singapore and the words that are used in the United States. We'll put a link for that video in the description bar so you guys can check that out. Let's transition to real quick and talk about jobs. What is the job hunt like here in Singapore? Can you tell us the process?
To be completely honest, it's not as easy as some people think it is to find a job here, especially as a foreigner. But there are a lot of different types of jobs available here in engineering, in finance, in teaching, music. I have a few expat friends who work here and who have been able to find jobs after a period of time. But it definitely, for me, I took some time. I took a lot of time actually, about a year and 2 months to travel. If you focus on honing in on your strength in your resume, and if you network, you'll be able to find a job here.
This might be a bit of a tricky question. I don't know if you can answer this, but do you feel like you had an advantage or disadvantage being of Asian descent looking for a job?
I honestly feel like I have neither an advantage or a disadvantage.
Okay, so it's neutral.
Yeah, I think as an expat, a lot of companies will ask you what your status here is in Singapore, what type of pass you're on. So whether you're on a long-term visit pass, a social visit pass. From my experience in my job search process, if you're a permanent resident, you have a higher chance of getting a job here, but that also doesn't mean that if you're on a social visit pass that you can't find a job here. It's definitely possible. It's just, it takes more effort.
So you haven't started work yet. What does a typical day look like?
So a typical day for me, I've always wanted to take some time to travel and to do things I've never been able to do before. I worked in finance and I worked in the US and I worked really long hours, sometimes 16 plus hour days. I really use this time of unemployment to do things that I have always wanted to do. So I've taken a Mandarin class, I've taken fitness classes, I'm in the process of getting a teaching certification. I'm halfway done to teach English. I wanted that as an option to maybe tutor. I'm also currently learning the guitar, and I'm doing YouTube. On a typical day, I would take my classes online, take guitar lessons near City Hall, work on YouTube videos, film, edit, and read a lot of articles. But I'm excited to get into the routine of having a job, waking up at a certain time, and making sure that I meet the expectations of my new job.
So you said that you have a job in marketing lined up? Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And can you give us a salary range? Like how much would someone expect to earn? So you've seen a lot of different job postings. Mm-hmm. What's the range?
I've actually done a lot of research here in terms of accounting and finance jobs. So I think I can give you a better idea of the salary range for accounting and financing.
Okay, sure.
For a similar job, entry-level to mid-level, 3 to 5 year experience accounting job here in Singapore, I would say the average salary is about 3,500 to 5,000 SGD per month.
Okay.
Comparing it to the same job in the US, you would make the same amount but in US dollars. So if you're coming from the US, you should expect to be paid about 75% of what you would earn in the US. But the good thing about Singapore is that the tax rates here are much lower. Last year it was about 0 to 22% compared to, I believe in the US, it's anywhere from 10 to up to 37%. Good thing about Singapore is that taxes here are lower.
Okay, so let's look at that 4,000 a month number. Mm-hmm. Do you think that this money is enough, and what kind of lifestyle can you live?
I think it's definitely enough, at least to cover your rent, food, and your other expenses, and still have a bit of savings. As long as you don't buy anything extravagant. For me, I live a pretty frugal lifestyle, and I find that amount is definitely enough.
How much can someone save if they're living a frugal lifestyle on about 4,000 per month?
So because I haven't started working yet, I can't give you an exact amount. A rule of thumb that I lived by when I was in the US is to save at least 30 to 50% of every paycheck. So I would recommend for anyone who has just gotten a job here in Singapore to maybe estimate your expenses. What I did was just Google to see how much food costs here in Singapore, how much rent costs here. Get a gauge of how much my total expenses would be for the month, and then see how much I can save, set a target, and then aim to reach that target every month.
How much money do you need to start up in Singapore?
That's a good question.
If you can give us like maybe a range.
I honestly think it depends on your spending habits. If you have a job secured here in Singapore, I would suggest at least 2 months worth of expenses saved up.
So that 2-month target leads very well into the next question. What does a typical budget look like? So your monthly budget, rent, utilities, transportation costs, food costs, eating in and out, entertainment. Can you tell us some numbers?
Yeah, so my numbers may be a bit skewed because to some people, my lifestyle is drastically frugal.
Okay.
But I'll try to give you a range based on what some of my friends are spending on their accommodations, food here in Singapore. For me, in terms of rental, if you are extremely frugal and you don't mind sharing a room with someone, I've seen rent as low as 350 SGD per month here.
Wow.
That is if you don't mind sharing a room, and it's probably not in the most convenient location. If you want your own room, I've seen rent as low as about 600 SGD per month. Also, probably not in the most convenient location, but like I said, there is such a great transportation system here. The MRT is really convenient. It shouldn't be too long of a walk to the nearest train station. But I have friends who are renting one room, a more expensive location like Orchard or around City Hall, and they're paying at least 3 to 4 times that amount. At least 3 to 4, at least 1,600 to 2,400.
How about transportation costs? What's your budget?
So for transportation, I do my best to take the MRT. For the MRT, they charge you by distance, and a trip ranges anywhere from about 70 cents to about 262 SGD. The typical month, if I'm using MRT very often, could range for me about 50 to 80 SGD. When I'm in a rush though, sometimes I take the Uber. For a trip, say from Jerome East to City Hall, that's about 20 SGD. So transportation could add up if you use Uber pretty often. For me, like I said, I try to use the MRT as often as possible, and because I haven't been working, I don't need to travel a lot, so I would say my transportation costs are about 50 to 80 at the most SGD per month.
All right, so I'm back with Jean. We were just talking about how should someone pack and what's the weather like, and we've actually had to move locations because the weather was so bad. The rain was so bad, the audio got a bit dodgy. So we're back with Jean. Jean, could you tell us, how should someone pack to move to Singapore, and what's the weather like?
That's actually one of the questions that my friends in the US ask me the most. They always ask me, when is the winter season in Singapore? What is the weather like? In Singapore, it's either hot and humid or rainy and humid. It's been raining a lot lately. In fact, it just rained a couple minutes ago, just stopped. I would suggest bringing a lot of light clothing, shorts, t-shirts, dresses, skirts for women, maybe a light jacket for the colder days. Usually after it rains, it's a little bit cooler. Lowest temperature I've experienced here in Singapore, it's about 21 to 23 degrees Celsius, 74 degrees Fahrenheit. But usually during the day, it's at least 30 degrees Celsius, 86 degrees and above. And there's definitely no winter season here in Singapore, which is something that I like. I can save a lot on winter clothing. You don't have to buy winter clothing.
So what are some things that you can't find in Singapore that you recommend people to bring from their home country, especially Americans? What do you recommend?
There really isn't anything that I'm used to buying in the US that I can't find here in Singapore. It's really a matter of cost. A lot of items, because they're imported here in Singapore, they cost a lot more than they would in the US. So, for example, floss costs a lot more here. I've seen one floss for about $4.65. Yesterday at the store I saw one floss for $6.95 SGD. I'm pretty sure you can find it for at least $2 to $3 cheaper in the US. So what I do is make a list of items to buy when I'm back in the US on Amazon or at Costco. Last year, my husband and I, we went back to the US, LA, and we bought a bunch of stuff in bulk on Amazon and Costco, including floss, and brought it back here to Singapore. You can find most items you use in your home country here in Singapore. It just might cost a little bit more.
Let's talk about safety. Is it safe there, and do you feel safe on a personal level?
Singapore has a relatively low crime rate. I definitely feel safe here. As an example, to give you an idea of how safe it is here, the first time I went to a hawker center to buy food, I noticed a lot of people leaving their wallets and their work IDs on the tables to hold the tables while they went and ordered food. And it was a little bit shocking to me because I've never seen anyone leave wallets behind in the US. It's not something that I recommend. I recommend using tissue packets to hold the tables instead of giving your personal info out. But that gives you an idea of how safe it is here in Singapore, that people are willing to put their wallets and IDs on the table.
How do you meet people and what can you do for fun?
Because my husband is Singaporean, he has a lot of friends here. I got to meet some new friends through him. I would recommend taking classes. I've taken some fitness classes, some guitar lessons. It was a really good way to meet new friends. We're networking. You can meet a lot of people through networking. We're taking up a hobby. In terms of things to do here for fun, so Singapore is really small. I was really surprised at how many things you can do here. If it's the first time you're in Singapore, I definitely recommend the touristy stuff, like Sentosa Island Resort, where there's a Universal Studios, there's indoor skydiving, there's a water park. There are also a lot of free things to do here in Singapore, including hiking. There's a treetop hike. You can do a leisure walk at Changi Boardwalk. There's also a really nice hawker center with a lot of delicious food nearby, very cheap food. If you're into music, Esplanade, which is this durian-shaped, very large performing arts theater. They have a lot of both paid and free concerts. I watched several paid concerts and several free concerts, classical music and pop.
Very cool. So it sounds like there's something for everybody. Let's talk about a topic that a lot of expats are interested in, especially before they move to a country: healthcare. What is healthcare like, and would you be confident getting a procedure done in Singapore?
So Singapore is known for their low-cost, high-quality healthcare. There are a lot of different medical facilities throughout Singapore, from hospitals to polyclinics to private clinics. Just as an example, in terms of cost, when I first moved to Singapore, I wasn't insured, and I went to a polyclinic to see a doctor because I had a cold. And as a foreigner, you pay a little bit more than someone who's PR or citizen. The consultation with the doctor and the medication together was around 40 SGD, which is pretty affordable to me. In the US, if you don't have insurance, for the same treatment and medicine, it'll cost significantly more. And even with insurance in the US, for the same consultation, I actually had to pay around the same amounts, even with insurance. And my insurance covered more than 80% the cost. Singapore is also among the most efficient. In terms of what I was most surprised about is just the low waiting time and the quality of the doctors that I've seen. I would definitely be comfortable having a procedure here in Singapore.
What do you think of Singapore as a travel hub? Is it a good travel hub? Why or why not?
I think Singapore is a great travel hub. Singapore has the world's best airport, Changi Airport. I've done quite a bit of traveling in the last year and a half, and Changi Airport is the only airport that I'm very excited to go to. It's just a very stress-free environment. There are a lot of things you can do at the airport. If you have a few hours before your boarding time, you can visit many attractions there. There are free movies, there's a butterfly garden, a sunflower garden, and you can even find some cheap foods at the staff canteen. I think it's in either Terminal 2 or 3. So I think Singapore is a great travel hub because Changi Airport is so efficient. I don't think I've ever waited too long to get my luggage. We're clear immigration and security. It's always been very easy. I like how Singapore is such a short flight from countries like Japan, Taiwan, China, of course Malaysia and Indonesia. It's definitely a great travel hub for exploring countries within Asia.
Awesome. Well, let's wrap up. What are the pros and cons of living in Singapore?
Pros, definitely transportation. The MRT train system here is extremely convenient, very efficient. Another pro would be all the food, the choices you have when it comes to food. There are a lot of different types of cuisines that you find at hawker centers. And the best part is that you can find a meal for as low as $250 to $350 SGD. A variety of cuisines, including Japanese, Korean, even some Western food. For me, I think the biggest pro is the airport. In terms of cons, there really is just one for me, and that's as a foreigner that's being away from my family and friends back home in LA. But I think that has also given me an opportunity to make more effort in keeping contact with them. Out of everything I had to adjust to here, that has been the most difficult.
All right, Jean, listen, we really appreciate you meeting with us. We thank you so much for taking the time. If people want to connect with you, how can they connect with you?
You can check out my YouTube channel. It's a very small, humble channel that I started for my family and friends. And anyone who's interested to get a glimpse of what life is like in Singapore, it's youtube.com/simplyjean, Jean. So you can check it out. And I have to say, make sure you subscribe to Expats Everywhere. I found a lot of their videos extremely helpful, especially the interviews on Singapore. So
Appreciate that. Thanks for your time.
thank you so much.